Welcome to the DOGE Diaries, diving deep into government efficiency. So, this whole DOGE thing, right? Department of Government Efficiency, headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, appointed by Trump, it's a lot to unpack,
Yeah, it is. Musk and Ramaswamy talk about shaking things up. And the goal? A leaner, meaner government. Sounds good in theory.
right? Slashing bureaucracy, cutting regulations, and supposedly saving $500 billion. They're talking about dismantling entire agencies.
Dismantling. That's a strong word. Reminds me of those news text files, like version 2.0, bug fixes, and then bam, version 3.0, half the features are gone.
Ha! Good analogy. So these news.txt files, I've seen them used for changelogs mostly, tracking software updates, new features, bug fixes, kind of a history of what's changed, right?
Exactly. But they could be used for anything, really. Just a simple text file. I've seen them used for basic news feeds in some PHP applications too.
Oh yeah, like a really rudimentary content management system?
Yeah, something like that. But back to DOGE, this whole entrepreneurial approach, I'm a little skeptical, frankly. It's government, not a startup. There are rules, procedures.
I see your point. It is a massive undertaking. Restructuring federal agencies? That's not a small feat. Ramaswamy even mentioned potential layoffs, up to 75% of the federal workforce, some articles say.
75%. That's extreme. And what about Musk's companies? Government contracts? Seems like a potential conflict of interest, no?
Yeah, that's been raised as a concern. Look, it's ambitious, no doubt, and there are definitely valid concerns. But if they can pull this off, imagine the impact. A more efficient government, less red tape.
I'll believe it when I see it. We'll have to watch those news.txt files closely. See what changes they actually log. By July 4th, 2026, we should have a clearer picture. That's their deadline, right?
July 4th, 2026, that's the D-Day, huh? For DOGE, I mean. Big, ambitious deadline. Dismantling bureaucracy, streamlining, it's a tall order.
It is. And 75% layoffs? That's a lot of people. I wonder how they'll decide who stays and who goes. What criteria will they use?
Yeah, the human cost is definitely a concern. Streamlining is one thing, but mass layoffs, that's another story altogether. Hopefully, they have a solid plan for that transition.
Hopefully. And what about the potential conflict of interest with Musk's companies? That's a big one. Government contracts and all that.
Absolutely. That needs to be addressed transparently. People need to be reassured that this isn't about personal gain, but about genuine government efficiency. It's a tricky situation.
It is. But let's go back to the dismantling part. They're talking about entire agencies. What happens to the services those agencies provide? Who picks up the slack?
Right. That's a key question. They've mentioned consolidating some functions, transferring responsibilities, but the details are still a bit fuzzy. We'll need to see that news.txt file for the DOGE department, eh? Version 1.0, what stays, what goes.
Ha! Exactly. Imagine the changelog on that one. Remove Department of Education, added online learning module. I'm being facetious, of course, but you see my point.
I do. It's like those software updates where they remove a feature you actually used, and you're left wondering, why? It worked perfectly fine.
Exactly, but on a much larger scale. We're talking about essential government services here, not just a handy app feature. This could have far-reaching consequences.
No doubt, it's a massive gamble, either incredibly effective or, well, a colossal disaster.
High risk, high reward, I suppose. Guess we'll see what happens. July 4th, 2026, TikTok.
So this entrepreneurial approach, right? It's like they're treating the government like a startup, slashing regulations, cutting expenditures. Sounds like a business model, not a government strategy.
Yeah, that's the part I'm struggling with. Government isn't about profit margins. It's about serving the public, providing essential services. Can you really apply startup principles to something like the Department of Education?
Well, they're arguing for increased efficiency, right? Less red tape, faster decision-making, like a well-oiled machine, instead of, the usual bureaucratic gears grinding slowly.
I get the idea in theory, but 75% layoffs? Restructuring? That sounds more like dismantling than restructuring, frankly. What happens to the people who lose their jobs? What happens to the services those agencies provide?
They've talked about consolidating functions, transferring responsibilities. I guess the idea is to streamline everything, make it leaner.
Leaner, yes, but at what cost? $500 billion in spending cuts sounds impressive, but where exactly are those cuts coming from? What programs are on the chopping block?
They haven't specified yet, which is concerning. I mean, $500 billion, that's a huge chunk of the budget. Where's that money coming from? Are they talking about cutting essential services or just trimming the fat?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the whole deregulation push, it worries me. Some regulations are there for a reason. To protect consumers, the environment, deregulation can have unintended consequences.
I see your point. It's a delicate balance. On the one hand, you want to reduce unnecessary burdens on businesses, but on the other, you need regulations to ensure responsible conduct.
Exactly. It's not a simple equation. And honestly, this whole entrepreneurial approach to government, it feels a bit gimmicky, like a buzzword, not a real solution.
So, $500 billion in cuts. That's a staggering number. I mean, where does that even come from? Are we talking about essential services here?
Right? That's what I'm wondering. It's easy to throw around big numbers, but the devil's in the details. What's actually getting cut, and what are the consequences?
Exactly. They talk about streamlining and efficiency, but I'm worried about essential services being impacted. Things like education, healthcare. You can't just slash and burn without consequences.
No, absolutely not. And then there's the whole conflict of interest issue with Musk and his companies. Government contracts, that needs serious scrutiny. Transparency is key here.
Yeah, that's a big one. People need to know this isn't about lining someone's pockets, but about genuine government efficiency. It's a tricky situation, to say the least.
It is. And honestly, this whole entrepreneurial approach, I'm skeptical. Government isn't a business. It's not about profit margins. It's about serving the public. Can you really apply startup principles to something like the Department of Education or the EPA?
I see what you mean. It's a different beast altogether. There are legal frameworks, regulations. It's not as simple as move fast and break things.
No, it's not. And let's be real, dismantling entire agencies, that's drastic. What happens to the services they provide, the people who work there? These are real people's lives we're talking about.
Absolutely. The human cost is a major concern. Streamlining is one thing, but mass layoffs, that's another story. They need a solid plan for that transition, if it even happens.
They do. And by July 4th, 2026, That's ambitious. A lot can happen between now and then. We'll be watching this very closely, checking those metaphorical news.txt files for updates, right?
Ha, exactly. Version 1.0 of the new, leaner government. We'll see what features they decide to keep and which ones they remove. Hopefully, they don't remove anything essential. Thanks for joining us on the DOGE Diaries, everyone. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, stay efficient. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, folks. We'll be back with more deep dives soon. So long, everyone.